So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Hoof Health webinar that we've set up. And really just Karl and I were talking just before we pressed the record button about the reason for putting this is, one, we're very excited that Karl Burgi is going to be in the country here in about 2 weeks, Karl, not far at all.
No, not long.
Not long. So we're very excited to have people traveling and experts coming out and seeing us again. And we just find that Zooms are great and webinars are great, but being on farm and practically talking to people and them seeing things, and especially people of Karl's experience, being able to pick things up that we just don't pick up over photos or videos. So a really unique opportunity to have Karl back in the country. We'll be doing some training, as Dean will finish off with in New South Wales and in Victoria, and we'll probably have a Queensland stint in there as well. So if there is any interest for people, get online. We'll send you through the link about how to catch up with Karl. That's a bit of a catch up with Karl.
Yeah,
it should be a podcast, Karl. Yeah, how to catch up with Karl and Dean Fry, who you'll hear from later on. That's part of our team in the next few weeks. So very exciting. So as I was saying, one of the reasons for putting this webinar on was just to do with our wet weather that we've been having. I was down the south coast with a farmer the other day, and he said it's been 14 days since our last rain, and they were celebrating that. It's just been so wet and so hard. So we've called Karl in to have a bit of a yarn just in regards to how we do this and how we manage some of the factors that have been thrown at us at the moment. So, Karl, we welcome you back to Webland, but we look forward to sort of catching up with you in person. What I might do is I'll throw it over to you, and the audience is yours.
well, it's my great pleasure to be in with you guys again, and hopefully sharing some worthwhile experience. And what we'll do is, when we get towards the end, what we'll have like some questions and answer things, and between Dean and myself, we'll be able to answer that. So the talking points today is how weather impacts hoof health. You guys already wrote that. What makes cows lame or impacts locomotion? How do we help lame cows right now? And the thing I can't stress enough, anti-inflammatories and pain control for better lameness recovery is a must. I mean, the research is there, we know it works, and we have to do it in cases. So, and then how do we set up the farm for the future? I think that's more of a discussion afterwards, and training equipment, tools, dealing with lameness. So how much does lameness cost you? And I'm just bringing this in here. And you can see here, when we look at a lame cow, these are basically 2002 figures. You know, we got higher production, we've got more valuable animals, all of that. When you look at it here, it was a lame cow was 360 kgs of milk, similar to a white line, 60 days, not in calf. So it increased the calving interval by 60 days. And she was 8.4 times more likely to be culled. Okay, that came out of some studies. So just, I don't want to spend much more on that, but when we look at lameness with grazing in Australia and New Zealand, the only thing I found was some from Shahab at the Uni of Queensland, and then Neil Chesterton, and he says 66% of the lameness is from trauma. Main lesions are white line abscesses, sole injuries, 28% tools and thin soles. And I think right now you guys are probably I understand what the wet is, because I've been talking with Dean, I've been talking to the guys in South Africa, which have very similar conditions right now. Even in Chile and in Colombia, it's been quite wet. High percentage of thin soles, and that's what we want to go after a little bit more. So you can see here why the grazing cows become lame. I just put this in again. We're going to talk about, there is white line lesions, axial wall cracks, and then foot rot or foul in the foot. And I'm certainly that you guys with wet condition have some of that. We're going to talk about that towards the end. But in general, for me, those three things or those four things, it's 95%, 98% of the lameness. You know, and right now it's probably thin soles and toe ulcers. So I'm going to focus a little more on that to just explain why this is happening. We want to understand, and then what are we going to do right now about that? But I think, because this is, in my opinion, this is not a one-time deal. This is going to come around to haunt us again. So we want to be more prepared next year or the year after when we get a wet period like that again, because we can fix maybe right now, but there is some things we can do on the prevention side of it. So when you look at here, just quick pictures, typical white line on a grazing cow, typical axial wall crack. And then here we have the toe ulcer and the thin sole here. And you can see here, a relatively small foot, all soft all the way through. I'm going to tell you right now, this is probably a first lactation animal, just on the size of the claws and everything. And there's just no sole on there at all. And we want to understand why this is happening. And because can we deal with this right now? Yeah, we probably can deal with it, but it's not easy to deal with. So, and then we have the foot rot, foul, or necrobacillosis. So what do we know? What do we know? With wet conditions, thin soles and foot rot played a major role. Again, I want to explain the anatomy just a little bit, because for me, that's always the foundation, because we have to understand what's happening. So we understand causes and effects. And then how do we resolve or deal with the current issue? What can we do right now? So with that, what everybody has to understand is that the horn grows at about 5 millimeters per month. And when you look at this picture here on the right, it shows it very clear. This is like a heifer foot that's never been on the track, never been in the yard. And what you can see here, that the wall all the way around is slightly higher. Okay, on both claws, the inside claws a little more concave, the outside claws a little bit flatter. But right where those arrows are, that's normal sole thickness when they're on pasture. And when we look at the anatomy later, so if you guys are pushing that with your thumb, it's probably yielding a little bit. But the thing we're going to show you afterwards, what actually the weight is bearing is on a claw like that. So when we go on here, you can see right now, the one thing here is we get muddy tracks or more of that abrasive. Wet conditions, we have softer horn. And what's happening then is you get exactly that. You can see now, this is a heifer foot, but it's already flat. That outside of the wall, which is supposed to be the weight-bearing surface area, is wore off from the wet tracks. So the soles in the toe become thinner. And what's happening is when the soles in the toe, especially on the tracks or on the yard, comes to thin, it results in inflammation. So we get inflammation inside of there. And I'll show you exactly and the results is what you see on the left here is the bruised horn. I don't see that on cows when they're on a smooth surface. So some of that has to do, and all my grazing colleagues talk about that. These pictures are from Australia, they're from Chile, they're from Colombia, and they're from South Africa. So they're dealing with the same exact thing. And Dean and I had a really great discussion with those guys the last few days, because I pushed them to give me more information or give me their feelings. So one of the things here you guys see on the left-hand side, we see the inside when we take the hoof capsule off. On the top, we have a healthy one. On the bottom, we have an inflamed one. And if we go back to this, if we go back here to this one here, if I go back one more time, and I click that, when a cow stands, it's exactly what's happening here is we impair the circulation. So it restricts the blood flow to the claw. And when they don't get to lay down enough, what's happening then is that eventually inflammation comes in, because because when they're standing too long, that kind of results in inflammation inside of the claw because that circulation isn't there. So it doesn't, we don't have a normal blood flow to the claws. And the normal blood flow, one of the interesting things in grazing cows, you have excellent blood flow when the cows are grazing out there on pasture. You have excellent blood flow when they're walking up and down the tracks. The limiting blood flow you have is when the cows are actually standing in the yard waiting to be milked. Where on confinement cows, we have, the confinement cows stand for 5 hours a day while they're eating, your cow, and they're not pumping blood. So in grazing, in confinement cows, we have this reduced circulation the whole time they're eating or drinking water or standing around. And for you guys on pasture, there is an advantage there. So when we have inflammation, that's really starts the problem. What you guys can see here is in the early stages, you see like a yellowness of the horn, okay? And then you see the redness of the horn. And that's, again, it's a sign of inflammation, a sign that the white blood cells actually leak out first. That's the yellow color. And then you get the more extreme redness, which means the corium is inflamed. It can no longer produce healthy horn. The other thing is the horn that's produced under inflammation is much weaker. So it also wears much quicker. And that's one of the things I want to explain a little bit more. When you guys look here at start of that thin sole cycle, again on the left-hand side, heifer foot, completely rounded off, nothing there at all. It's soft all the way around. That's the lateral claw he's pushing on there right now. But it's the same thing over on the other side. And you can see she actually flinches a little bit. Okay, that means there is extra pressure there. That's generally where the sole ulcer side is. But when that sole wears out, gets too thin, it just puts pressure on all the corium. And you can see on both sides here, just that diffused hemorrhaging throughout the claw. I don't see that in confinement cows. That's part of the reason that, for me, I think that's caused partially by walking the tracks, because especially tracks that are not nice and smooth, that get wet, where sometimes the gravel comes up a little bit. It's just not a smooth surface. And there is a precondition that makes then the inflammation worse. And we'll get to that. So for you guys to understand this, this hasn't started just today. For me, the crucial period is 21 days before calving to 21 days after calving. And that's what I want to focus on a little bit more here in the conversation. What do? We expose high-risk animals to standing in the yard or walking in the poorly maintained tracks. And what I want you to think about is it's coming to the start of that thin sole cycle. The first lactation animals especially are most affected. When I talk to my colleagues, it's first lactation and second lactation have the biggest problem with thin soles. So one of the things is we know that it's lack of good transition from being a heifer. That heifer is out on grass her whole life. Now we transition her and she calves. She's got to stand in the yard to be milked. And the other thing is she's got to walk the tracks all of a sudden, sometimes from one day to the next. And we know for a fact that heifers have the highest risk of inflammation at first calving. That's a very common knowledge all around. It's because of the relaxin, the enzymes and the hormones all together. It's just they have to make more room for giving birth, but that part of inflammation is also much in their whole body. So we need to look at that as a risk factor.
And Karl,
yes.
So Karl, in amongst that as well, something that we didn't discuss last night, but when we talk inflammation, we're talking about a system that takes and robs the animal from a lot of glucose. So when the animal is particularly, a heifer coming through transition, it hasn't gone through this before, glucose is the ultimate. We're trying to get as much glucose produced by the liver in these animals to meet everything else that they actually need to do for us to produce milk and get back in calf and keep conditioned on everything else. But the other big one is that I found absolutely fascinating is the keratinocytes that grow the horn are glucose exclusive users. So as soon as we start robbing glucose to go to inflammatory responses, which the immune system takes a crap load of glucose, we start robbing places like keratinocytes, and our horn production and our skin integrity starts to really pull back.
And Dean, I'm glad you talked about that, because you talk much better about that than I could even talk about it. And would you give me right that it's probably worse in heifers than it is in mature cows?
I think in heifers, it's purely because they've gone through the whole process of mammogenesis in that last period. They haven't been through it before. They're going through so many hormonal changes. I don't know if it's actually worse in terms of the inflammatory response, Karl, but it's certainly very noticeable. Yes. I think it's got a lot more, to be honest, I think it's a lot more to do with the social hierarchy when you're putting young stock into old stock, that they get bashed around on a non-yielding surface like concrete more than any other animal. So they have so many compounding issues going on.
Yes, and that's why I mentioned here is you move them into the rest of the mob the day they calf sometimes or shortly thereafter, and they're just not used to being up front in the yard to get milk quickly. And I remember years ago, one of my colleagues from the university was called to a lameness investigation in Uruguay, and they thought they had acidosis. So he checked like 50 or 75 cows pH on those, and he couldn't find a pH that was off. But when he paid more attention, and it was mostly the younger cows, the 2-year-olds, he saw that they were standing behind with milking. So they're quite vulnerable, because one of the other things we know about heifers is about 3 to 4 days before calving, they stand about 90 minutes more per day compared to a cow. So they're already setting themselves up. After they calf, they lay down more, but that pre-calving period, when they're more vulnerable, when all those things happen, they're actually standing more. You know, and my thing is, how long will it take before the heifer is up front? And that's where sometimes guys that have a heifer group, a small heifer group, have an advantage, because those heifers go in and out, and I've had guys sort them out just to reduce that time, and we actually could see quite an improvement in the claw condition on those heifers.
And I think you raised that last night, Karl. I think that's a really valid point in terms of this webinar, in terms of, right, we're in amongst the wet period, we're in amongst lameness issues, we're in up into our heads with a lot of issues. Talking about that heifer one, I mean, it's something that's not easy to do on our systems in Australia and New Zealand and grazing-based systems, but separating heifers out in that initial transition period, at least for the first 21 to 30 days, and actually milking them quickly through the shed when they're going through all these different changes in their body, and their horns getting used to the non-yielding surface, the fat pads getting altered around, everything's changing within this animal. The quicker we can get them in and out of the shed, the longer the longevity is going to be for those animals.
And Dean, you're exactly right. We've seen that over the years. You know, when we give those heifers a chance, and I've worked with some grazing dairies in Australia over the years that actually tried to do that. And they were actually quite successful. So what I want to end up with here, sometimes we don't give them a chance to succeed because we just mix them in with the rest of the mob. And for me, I think when I travel around the world, that's one of the things I certainly see plays a huge role. Because one of the things here I want to quickly talk about is it's a digital cushion. The digital cushion is like some fatty tissue, and what it does is it provides cushion to the back of the pedal bone. It's not present in the toe. So in those soles, so in the back, we have a little extra cushion there. So the thin sole in the back actually doesn't have as huge an effect as it has it up in toe. In the toe, we have sole, we have corium, and we have bone. And I'll show you a picture afterwards. So in the front, there is just no margin, although we know from a suspension standpoint, the pedal bone is suspended much better in the toe triangle. So in the front 1/3 here than it is in the back. But the other thing here, what everybody has to understand, it's like a circulation pump, but we need to keep it healthy so it can perform, it can do its work, and it needs movement. That's why you guys, just the grazing farms, see very few white sole ulcers, because that digital cushion does the job, okay? As soon as you stand them more, then we have to change trimming, we have to change the action, because that's when that digital cushion can't pump blood anymore.
And Karl, on that point, Karl, with the fat pad, so it's a really valid point in terms of the transition. So, we're into June at the moment, coming through that. We're coming into the next phase for a lot of our seasonal calvers for spring calving. That transition management is huge on fat pad retention, because when we go through that transition, the animal goes into ketosis. They're actually utilizing body fat to supply energy requirements to the animal, which is a natural process, and we can't stop it, and we don't want to stop it, but we want to prevent the inflammatory or the runaway impact of ketosis. But the thing to be really cognizant of is that if we do a really average job in that transition management in managing body condition drop, that animal is taking fat from everywhere, including the fat pad. And if we reduce that fat pad in that really integral 21 days, that's where, again, I think we see these escalating problems with inflammatory responses in these feet.
Good point, Dean. So the other thing I just wanted everybody to understand, from some research in the last 15 years, we know that in heifers, so on those heifers that calf, that fat pad is kind of underdeveloped, especially heifers that are raised on pasture. And we know that it takes exercise on hard surfaces to stimulate development of the fat pad. So, and just like Dean, and the other thing we understand today is that when we have inflammation, the fat pad is actually one of the first ones to go. So if we have a lot of inflammation at the beginning, I'll show that, or we have a lack of good transition, or we already work with an underdeveloped fat pad in grazing cows compared to cows that we move on concrete 4 to 8 weeks before calving. There, that fat pad really develops and gets more, has more volume, and actually can absorb more of the shock. But as soon as that inflammation sets in, we're losing some of that fat pad. And when you guys look at it here in the next slide, so grazing cows have a smaller cushion, but they don't need it because most of the time they're on the soft surface. It's important to adjust to concrete or tracks before that, or if we can do it at least with that 3 weeks before calving. But it's even better, what we found is in the confinement settings, if we do the adjustments during the transition, we never had very good luck. So we actually bring them into the environment where they're in, actually up to 6 weeks before. So there's like 3 weeks. We have like a little bit of a lead time, okay? So the other thing to show you guys here is quite important. Is these are illustrations by research from Switzerland. They're probably 20 years old, and these are healthy. These are what healthy fat pads look like, illustrations. After we have inflammation, the fat actually goes away and it's replaced by connective tissue. And we know for a fact today, because we've cut a lot of feet apart, they've done ultrasound, when that fat pad goes away, we can never bring it back. It's gone forever. So we have one chance with that. And if we mess it up, when that heifer calves, I can tell you it's probably always going to be present at a much smaller amount. So you have poorer circulation, poor shock absorbing, and the other thing is poor recovery of lame cows. I mean, I know that for a fact. What you see here is when we have a cross-cut foot. So up here, there wouldn't be a fat pad. You can see there's maybe 2 millimeters here in the toe here, and then back here it's present. But when the new research shows us that the load, so if you guys look at the red lines on the outside, when a cow is out on pasture, so this is the inside claw, this is the outside claw. And the more red or the more light it is, the more weight, the more red it is, the more weight it carries. And you can see here in grazing cows at 48-degree angle on dirt, okay, how nicely the wall bears the weight. It's optimal. It's couldn't be any better. That's why we don't have sole ulcers. When you guys go to the other side and look at what's happening with the same angle on concrete or on the track, you can see that the redness is back in the typical sole. It's back in the heel and on the outside wall. This is actually where the claws get the thinnest first. This is actually where that sole wears down very quickly because of the way it loads when we're at a low angle. So what we're seeing out there is today is proven by science, and so we need to understand that what we can do about this, and we're going to talk more about this when we actually do the hoof trimming classes when I come back out. This is an interesting picture. This heifer 5 weeks ago was moved from pasture to a freestyle setup, and you can see all the way around in the white line and a little bit in the sole, you can see the red ring. That red line, that red ring is completely from the initial impact going onto a hard surface, because that transition time, there's that moderate transition time that lamina requires to be able to suspend that cow's weight, or to be able to deal with the concrete in the yard, going to be able to deal with the tracks. And if we do this together with the transition 3 weeks before calving or during calving, it's almost like a double whammy because of all the things that Dean talked about before. So for me, this happens to heifers on pasture when they come in the milking yard and the tracks, if we don't give them a little bit of adjustment time. And I think just 2 or 3 hours on the track or on the yard a day can make a huge difference to those animals, because it just gets them used to it. It gets them used to it. So the other thing here is, Dean, do you have any other comments here?
No, I think where you're getting to here, Karl, I mean, the whole thing, you mean, exposing an animal to something they've never seen before, it's really important. I mean, in Australia, you know, in our systems that we've currently got the majority of, our calves and our heifers never see concrete until they come into the calving. And so you can understand why they wear off so quickly. They're going through so many changes, but that yielding surface is basically sandpaper as well.
Yes,
So,
and you know, Dean, we see the same thing like on the heifers that are raised out in the dry lots out west. Okay, you know, yes, they're eating on concrete, but they're spending a fair amount of time walking or being out on the dirt, you know, and generally dry conditions, most generally where those dry lots are, on those heifers, we have to be very careful too. If they bring them in too close to transition, sometimes we see some issues as well, you know.
Yep.
So, okay. So the other thing here is for all of us, what we need to think about is that time budget of the cow, of the grazing cow. About 8 hours eating, 8 to 11 hours resting, 2 hours of standing, drinking water, and 2 to 3.5 hours of milking. And sometimes there is situations where cows are running out of time. They always cheat on the laying time. They always cheat on the laying time, even in confinement. If we don't have good freestalls, they'll stand more. If we're overcrowded, they stand more. They rarely cheat on the eating time, because I think sometimes we know that cows that are overcrowded eat a little more aggressively, less meals, more at the time, or sometimes quicker. But in grazing, I think they can only, they can only eat so fast. So for me, I think, like Nigel Cook said, sometimes cows are running out of time, and that's something we need to take into consideration.
Karl, if you want to just go back on that slide, do you want to go back to that last slide?
Yep.
So the one thing, again, we're talking about what can we do and what's present right now, and one of the biggest dogmas we always get in a grazing dairy system is our tracks are crap. Our tracks are the issue. Our tracks are this. If we had the time, and the time budget is perfect, but if we had the time for cows to walk single file back from the paddock to the dairy and had the time restrictions of trying to get them back to lie down, we would not have the majority of issues that we have if the cow could actually do the time that she wanted to. They will find where their foot is going. They'll see the rock. They'll make the best track they can find. So it's not our tracks. It's actually, going forward, it's our time that we have the issue with. So improving our tracks allows our time budget to come back into realm and allow us to actually get more lying time for those cows. That's where it all sort of comes unstuck, is that unfortunately our tracks turn to crap right now in a lot of circumstances. And that's where I find that's where the track discussion comes in, as opposed to everyone always points to the tracks being the problem.
Okay, good point, Dean. Good point. So the other thing here is, and these are, so the black line here is temperature humidity index. And you can see here, we did this all from at a farm. It's over a matter of 5 years, or 6 years, actually, 6 years. And when you look at it, lameness here, and these are mostly clawhorn lesions, always followed, there was like a 2 months lag time. And what I want all of you to understand is that, what happens in January and February for you guys, it's exactly what happens for us in June and July. The effects we see a lot of times out into November, okay? The lingering effects. The peak will be like after the hottest time of the year, and that has, the only thing we could see here is it had much to do with just laying down time. In this particular, there was a study done in 2004 where we look at this here, and basically those cows that came lame laid 3 hours less that particular period a day than what the healthy cows did, and that's why they became lame. So I just want to, the tracks, I want the time in the yard. And the other thing, I want to just always make you understand that it takes time for that to develop. If that thin sole, like for us, I'm seeing when I come out to Australia over the last few years, when I go to confinement areas, the thin soles start about the middle of August. They go through the middle of, sorry about that, the middle of February. They're going through like the end of May, we're kind of getting out of it, okay, on the confinement areas. At the end of May, there's not many anymore. In your grazing dairies, you're coming out of that summer, and if it's nice and dry, those soles maybe are a little bit thinner, but they're marginal. The cows get around because the conditions are dry. But then your rains start in, and now we have a twofold thing. The horn is wetter, the tracks are more abrasive, and all of that. So and the heat stress on cows, when you look at here, this was 11 o'clock in the morning. I was at we did a meeting at this dairy, and about every hour I walked out and see what cows were doing. And from 11 o'clock till 3 o'clock, there wasn't hardly any cows laying down. And the high temperature was probably 25. And there was no shade. There was no, and the respiration rate went up. We counted respiration rate. And when you look at it here, yeah, they were grazing a little bit at 11 o'clock, but they really weren't eating anymore. A lot of them were just standing because they were getting hot. So for me, that's when once that cycle begins, And so we need to understand that it's a combination of things, okay? And then what we have to look at is when we're putting 200, 400, 600 cows in the yard, every cow produces body heat. And we do that in the middle of the afternoon. Those cows come out of there overheated. When we know when the body temperature is up, the cows won't lay down. So even though you send them back to the paddock, it's going to take them longer to lay down. And just think back, what happens is when the cows are standing, what happens to the circulation of the claw? The same thing, some farms out there, they thought, well, let's put a roof over, put some fans in there, okay? But the thing is, if they don't have a place to lay down, okay, we've got one thing taken care of. We got shade, we got cooling, but we decrease we're making them stand longer. The longer they stand, the more inflammation we have, the poorer the horn quality. And the only way we can reduce inflammation is by walking or by having them lay down in a comfortable place.
The only caveat to that, Karl, I think there's a caveat to that. I think you're spot on, but at the same token, like your photo before, I mean, we've got, when we get into heat stress, I mean, we've got cows not in 23 degrees, it's 45 degrees. They're standing, there's no doubt about it. So even just by, I mean, it's not the ideal, it's not the ultimate, but even by just having that roof over, that's probably dropping down 10 to 15 degrees, having the air exchange and cooling opportunity, that will have an impact, but they will still be standing. You're absolutely right. We still need them to be lying down, but we have just reduced their heat load by 15 plus degrees. So it does have an impact, but we still not where we want to get to.
Exactly. And over the years, when I've been out to these facilities, we actually still had a fair amount of lameness. And for a while, I didn't understand why. Now we know, because it's that standing time just causes that increased inflammation. And if we don't get the laying down time out in the paddock afterwards, or if it takes them longer to lay down or they don't cool off, they automatically stand longer, even in the evenings, if the nights don't cool off as well. And that would be an underlying cause. So,
well, even on that one, Karl, we've had some research done where, we're doing a lot of work around putting roofing and ventilation over holding yards, where it is the hottest period of the day. Because what we're finding with some body core temperature technology we're utilizing is that they're not dissipating heat sometimes till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly, I could have shown that, but that's exactly, they're cooler from 3 o'clock in the morning till noon the next day, till 12 the next day, than they are from afternoon, from noon till midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning. And that's something we always thought, well, when the sun goes down, the cows are cooling off, and we don't even have to cool them as hard anymore. Now we've learned we actually have to cool them harder after 3 o'clock in the afternoon than we do before, because that's when that heat peaks and is in the mid to late evenings, and then early in the night. So, okay. So what's the first action? What we have to do is we have to watch cows. That's a really important part. Now here it's a dry track, but we have to watch those cows, because the ones with the thin soles, they make more steps. They have shorter steps because they have more pain. And what we need to do is we need to pick those cows very quickly, so we get them before they actually get acutely lame. And we'll talk in a little bit what we can do about that. But the other thing here is just to show you, on the left hand is a normal, healthy toe, cross cut. And you can see how long that wall is. And when we get those short toes, when that sole wears through, you can actually tell by just them standing there. I can tell by eye when I walk into a barn if the claws are short or if they're not. And because of the wet tracks, this goes away, and eventually that's when you get the infection in toe. That's when you get those toe ulcers. And the problem with the toe ulcers is a lot of times, if we're not quick with those, is the infection actually goes into the bone. And that's why sometimes toe ulcers don't recover quickly. So we need to be really on top of it to when that cow is good one milking and the next milking she walks out three-legged. I had a cow this morning, the neighbor called, he says, I got a cow that's three-legged. And I went out there and guess what? It was in the toe, you know. Yesterday she was fine. The guys picked her out last night and this night milking. And this morning she barely had pus, but she had it right in the toe. She had a crack in the toe and an infection starting. So, and you can see here short, and then when you look at the video, okay, see, this is even a confinement. She's actually harder behind it, but the toe is really short. And what I found with these now is I have really good luck when I find them early. I put a Bond 365, that new glue on it, because what the new glue is, we spread the weight out more. It doesn't get as hot. And a lot of times I actually grind the block down according, like maybe if I'm in a grazing back conditions, maybe I wouldn't take quite all the way down to what I did here. I'd leave a little bit more on, but we have to understand that that glue will wear because it's a really strong glue. After it's dry, it probably wear for 4, 5, 6 weeks or 8 weeks on that. But that's a quick fix. It's not what I find is with the polyurethane, with the tube glues, that sometimes they get too hot on those thin soles, and then my cows don't sometimes I get an infection underneath it. So it's really kind of tricky to do those, you know. Now we're going to talk a little bit more. What else we can do is you know, when you get one claw that's worse, automatically you can put a wood block on it, or if there's a lot of wear, like this guy here in South Africa, sometimes he just has to use a plastic block because they maintain their shape better than the wood blocks, and they stay on longer. So both on the left, quite a mild toe ulcer here, early diagnosed, but you can see again how flat that is, right? And I guarantee you, and that's actually an inside claw here, and you know, she can deal with a block on this claw, but she's not going to be a happy camper for if she has to walk on that for a long time. The other thing on inside claws, that if we catch them early, the recovery is very quickly. So sometimes in 2 weeks, we've got nice new horn growing, and we can actually switch the blocks around, and we can put the block over that toe ulcer that's just recovered. Other thing to understand is the longer we wait with the treatment, the more damage there is to the corneum and to the bone underneath it. And we'll talk about that. So wet track, softer horn, okay? And you can see here, I understand it's a difficult. These actually are from South Africa, and they've had a heck of a time this year as well, you know? And I was going through this today, and I remember years ago when my son was about 3.5 years old, and we were working together with my brother-in-law, and one day the little guy came out and he says, "Uncle, when the future comes, will you be ready?" And I think it's one of those things is here for the future. We have to think is the time is now, because I think we're going to see those conditions over and over. Maybe we have a good year, 2 good years. You know, you guys in Australia for like from 2003 to 2010 or 11, you were dry. You were really dry. Everything worked really well then. We didn't see a lot of thin soles. And then I remember when the first flood came in the valley, and there was a lot of thin soles afterwards. I was out shortly after that. So,
Karl, could you
yes.
go back 2 slides?
Yep.
Next one. So I think it's really important to understand, again, when we got these conditions. I mean, that jersey right there is just a classic example of a cow that is in inflammatory response. When we have an inflammatory response, we lose body condition. You can see the condition score of that cow is not great. She's losing energy. She's putting everything she can into milk and trying to maintain herself in a pretty ordinary situation, which we've got in wintertime at the moment. It's just really important to know that energy is, once we lose energy and glucose goes, I mean, those, again, keratinocytes just do not get the enough energy and glucose to them to actually produce the horn. So it's a cascading issue. It's just very important to sort of be aware of why your cows may be losing condition in those situations. And it may be because it's subclinical lameness in that score 2, 3, as opposed to a lame cow, but it's that 2 and 3 that we can do a lot of work with.
Yeah, and see, she could be a cow that just has thin soles, right? And that creates a constant pain. It results in a constant pain, and so eventually it's kind of like a vicious cycle. We really can't get out of it.
Correct.
Okay, and so, like I said, the time is now. So right now you have those thin soles, and I had to press a little bit here, but I'm gonna give you some good tips. So what we do is here, we use, like in the exit race, we use just a piece of carpet, like a piece of old carpet that come out of a living room or bedroom or something like that. And we lay it down so the cows can walk across. And we soak that, just soak it with full strength formalin, so 37% formalin. We soak that. We don't want it to splash, so we don't want to put too much on there so it runs off. We only want the soles to make contact. And our colleague, Dean, and my colleague from South Africa, Jaco de Bruin, he's done that for many years, quite highly successful. And even one of the guys in Colombia tried it, and it worked quite well. And what they're saying is that about every 100 cows, we have to add about 1 liter of formalin. Okay. Now, formalin is a carcinogen. And the thing here is, everybody, we have to take the proper precautions. Okay. It has to be away from milking at the outside of the race. But even if the tracks are wet, this is going to make a difference, because what it does is that strong formalin pulls the moisture right out of the outer layer of the sole. And that's what we want, is we want to make that sole a little bit tougher. Okay. So we need to start it as soon as we get rain. We need to start that. That's, in this case, this is not going to prevent foot rot. This is not going to do anything else. We don't want to have it deep, or I don't want to put it in a hoof pass. I want to do it just like he did it here in the exit race. Okay. And we have to do that every milking. We can't miss a milking, and we have to make sure, maybe if it's the right type of carpet and it's soaked well and conditions are clean, maybe it's not every 100 cows, but we just have to monitor that. We want to make sure that it gets good contact with the sole, but we don't want it to splash on the skin or anything, because that would cause a burn. So it's really important this works, but it has to be managed. And you know, it's probably something we can automate, but we cannot automate. But I think it's something that, with good cautions, we can deal with that. Maybe we can have a container up above with a hose on the end, so nobody has to touch it, nobody has to get close. And probably, if I deal with full strength formaldehyde, I would probably put a respirator on or a mask on while I pour that on there. But I'm going to tell you right now, this is what we can do right now. Okay. So long-term goal, we know we have to work with the tracks. Okay. And I don't have to tell you what from that end. I think that we can leave that up to discussion. So what some of the control factors are, we have to transition those first lactation animals. We have to do a better job, because if they come through calving all day long and your tracks are pretty good, but they're just marginal with sole thickness, then when it gets wet, they're the first ones to go, because they have the smallest claws. those heifers have smaller claws than your third lactation or fourth lactation cows, because it takes to about the second lactation until that claw is full grown. We need to do that heat abatement. We need to reduce that forced standing. I know I worked with one of the producers out in West Australia, and he actually starts splitting the group in the hot days and keeping the rest of the cows in the shade before he brought them up to the milking parlor, even though that was shaded, just to reduce the amount of heat in that holding yard. Okay, utilize rubber, wood chips, straw the rooster. Anybody has done it. I mean, a lot of different things have been done, you know, and that herd size to optimize milking time. I can't stress that too much, because as the farms have gotten larger, you know, cows spend more time waiting to be milked than what they did years ago. And that's the only way we can minimize standing. That's the only way we can manage inflammation. Okay?
On that last slide, that manage inflammation, I think, again, go back to what we're trying to achieve today to help the industry is, what can we do right now? Managing inflammation, again, I'll go back to the story of glucose, but everything we can do nutritionally that provides more glucose to the animal. So making sure we've got enough energy going into the diet. You know, we've really got our nutritional hat on, and we're making sure that as much glucose we can supply is there. But things like trace minerals, so zincs and your biotins are crucially important. You're not going to change the foot overnight with something like zinc, but you really need to make sure you've got the right level and right source of these things going in. They have a huge impact on managing that inflammation. Okay, good point, Dean. So now I want to just spend a little bit of time on foot rot. You know, generally foot rot happens not the day it rains or the next day, or usually happens a couple days later, because what it really is it's skin abrasion in the grazing system. And then with a compromised immune system, so like that cow that we saw before, that skinny cow, okay, she's doing everything she can. She's already compromised. And you know, and then we need to look at is generally early lactation cows are more susceptible to foot rot, okay? The other thing here is, you know, these are the perfect conditions. You know, it's going to happen here no matter what we do in these type of conditions. So the treatment for me, foot rot is the only treatment that requires antibiotics, okay, and an anti-inflammatory, sometimes pain reduction medicine prescribed by a veterinarian. Okay, you guys need to have a good discussion with your veterinarians, but this is a really important part. You know, the other thing is we need to diagnose it early, because the longer, just 24 hours delay or 10 hours delay, that inflammation gets more, and the effects of the antibiotics goes down every 10 to 12 hours. When we get them to when we treat them early with the antibiotic, they respond really well. If they don't respond, we miss the optimal treatment time. You know, good hygiene, which is with track, is a problem, and the hoof bath with an effective disinfectant. But okay, if the cows walk out into the muddy race afterwards, the hoof bath is really, it's probably a total waste of time. And so we have to do more to make sure we have good immunity, work on that, you know, I think with the trace minerals and some of those things, right, Dean? You trace minerals and energy. I mean, they're the things that we can do right now. We can just absolutely look into the nutritional aspect of it. So many things we can't change, which is the mud in the tracks and the conditions we have. We can't change and influence that, but we can influence what's going into the animal.
The other thing here to just point out to you guys, when we get a foot rot, a lot of times that wall inside loosens up. if we don't put her in the chute or in a crush and trim that loose horn away, what happens is they actually have more pain and they don't walk as well. So the circulation is impaired and your antibiotic is not working as well either. So I like to get them into the trim chute, get that loose wall trimmed out, just like this is a typical example. And a lot of times this is necrosis in the center, just fatty tissue. A lot of times that just falls right out of there. And I would say this is probably a couple days, maybe 24, 36 hours. You can already see that type of stuff. So in the severe cases, so we need to do that. And you know, with the hoof baths, if the conditions are nice, if those cows stand in a clean environment for 20 minutes to an hour after they go to the hoof bath, the 2% formalin will be highly effective. If they walk right out into the muck, you're not gonna get any results at all. And the other thing to show you guys is this is a foot rot treatment, topical foot rot treatment that can help along. And what this is actually is like a disinfecting cream. So this is happen to be an iodine cream, but any disinfecting cream will work. And we mix that with about 1 part cream, about 5 to 6 parts table sugar, and we put that in between the toes. And I just wrap the toes together for 12 to 24 hours. And then the wrap has to come off, because after it's treated, we want to get air to it, because when we have air, no harmful bacteria can grow. So, but this is a treatment that can sometimes help along. And actually, when we put this on, when we put that wrap, I just put the wrap right around the claws, virtually nothing in between the toes, to just kind of immobilize them, so they don't move. So anyway, just make sure, like we talked about with those foot bath solutions, they work, but they're not going to work if the cows walk up through here afterwards. Okay, so and this whole thing is, it's about, you know, it's about the welfare. It's really the bottom line to be proactive, to do things that we can right now. Like we mentioned, I want to just do a wrap up. You know, if those soles are soft, we can dry them out with some strong formalin. That's pretty easy to do. That will help a tremendous amount. You know, you might get an extra crack of the sole or something like that, but that's what we have to deal with. That's better than having everybody with thin soles. And then the second thing is to just make sure that from the beginning, we look at, now that you guys getting into the spring calving season, that you pay good attention to what's happening. With that, I think there's some questions on chat here, I see.
Yeah, we just got a question just in regards to horn growth, Karl. When you, Chloe's just asked, fair conflicting information out there. So how long does it actually take for the hoof capsule to grow, and also thin soles? If you're, how long or how much hoof growth is per day, and I guess how long is that going to take to grow back?
Well, see, generally we have about 5 mils of hoof growth per month. Okay, but that means healthy hoof growth. The sole might be maybe 4 millimeters per month. But what we have to understand is when those cows walk on the tracks, okay, so much of the horn growth, that growth is going to go away every week. Okay, so that's, in my opinion, when the sole gets too thin, is what's happening is we ran out of sole because the cow can't produce it any faster. And we talked about before that when we have inflammation, the horn actually grows faster, but the quality of the horn is poorer. So it actually works quicker. So it's kind of like a devil's circle, or it's like a vicious circle. We cannot get out of it for the same reasons that Dean even talked about earlier.
Yeah, I just enjoyed some of your practical approaches just in regards to I guess, what we can do now, and that where we're at. And the comment of, was it your son that said, "Are you ready for the future?"
Yeah, that's my son's. What was my son's? Yeah,
I love it.
that was my son's, and he got that from actually, it was an investment commercial that said, "Okay, when the future comes, will you be ready with your investments?" But I think we can use it in a lot of different ways, you know, and a little 3.5 or 4-year-old can remember that and knows the meaning of it. It's quite amazing. So,
brilliant. And Dean, you had a few slides just in regards to a few practical, just as waiting. You want to pull that slide up?
Yeah, just trying to get it to work now.
We're just looking. Dean and Karl are obviously talking offline there the other night, just about some of those practical approaches on what we can do. And Dean came up with a few scenarios that were available locally.
Tell me if I've got the right screen up. Yeah, that's the one.
There we go. And if you've got any other questions too, then just fire them through on the question and answer as well.
So I think Mike and Karl, just in regards to what we sort of laid this day out for, and we'll just go over those topics. But you know, the webinar to cover wet weather impacts on hoof health. I think we've explained pretty well what happens in wet weather, and we know our farmers know what's going on, and they're in a lot of pain at the moment. You know, about preventing lameness, declining locomotion, and minimising factors that cause impaired mobility in cows. You know, there's strategies and there's things we can do right now. Even though we're amongst it, there are things that we can do. How as managers and owners can we help the cows into the future? Without a doubt. That's why we've got Karl coming out. That's why, you know, as a business and Eagle Direct, I've been out there doing trimming training programs on farm with Dairy Australia, right across the country. And we'll be taking this to New Zealand too. But basically, yeah, the future, as Karl mentioned, your son, you know, are you ready for the future? We've got to start stepping back in time to make sure that we've got everything happening for the future, for setting these animals up. And I think we spend pretty good time on heifer management in terms of trying to get the longevity out of those heifers. And it's very timely, I think, Karl, with that discussion on heifers, in also the discussion with the carbon capture, methane trading, all these different things. One thing that we can do as an industry, if we get the greater longevity out of our cows, it actually helps with the methane reduction and carbon capture. And there's so many other things that we're working through at the moment, but longevity in our animals is huge. And if we set them up to fail from the start, we're not going to have them in our herd. So I think we touched on that pretty well today, Karl. Functional trimming and its effect on recovery. I think that's something we didn't really touch on in terms of, you know, what can we do right now? And that's something we're going to be doing. We've got Karl coming out, and I'll put up the details in a minute, and we'll send out the links as well. But we've got Karl coming in to do some hoof training, to do a 2-day course and some work to bring out the information again in a couple of locations around Australia. I think it's a big thing that I've learned over the last probably 8-10 years is the pain mitigation and pain work we can do. So Karl, we had this discussion last night with Karl, and unfortunately in America, which is why we probably don't see a lot of this information, is that a lot of the medication or the opportunities that we have in Australia are not available in the US as easily as they are here. So things like ketoprofen, which is just basically a Nurofen for cattle. It's an anti-inflammatory. What we've seen in research done is that it's such an important aspect that even one shot of an anti-inflammatory on a recovery session with a block on a cow, on a therapeutic trim on a cow, the speed to recovery is massively improved, just from one shot. So speak to your veterinarians, make sure you've got anti-inflammatories on hand. And it goes to say not only lameness, but also mastitis. Any inflammatory response and anti-inflammatory is got some very good research. The equipment that's required in order to safely and effectively handle these cows, from everyone's experience, if it's not easy to do, it won't get done. And that's where Karl spent, 30 years, Karl, or more, in terms of developing this equipment, the tools that we use effectively on farm to actually grab a foot safely for the cow, but more likely safely for us as operators to actually deal with those animals. And I've got a couple of pictures of that, but the hoof care coaching that we've got coming up, this is actually just online at the moment on Facebook and beyond all the socials. But we've got a couple of sessions coming up. We've already filled in a few, but we've got a couple. We'll have one probably in Gippsland during the start of July, and we'll have another one in Sydney where we're landing Karl first. We'll be landing him in the actual Sydney on the 3rd of July, and doing a 2-day course at Leppington LPC, which is where Karl's normally done them for the last how many years. But we'll be doing a first 2-day course the 4th and 5th of July at Leppington. Spot's still available, but just in terms of some of this equipment that Karl's got, I'm just going to run through a couple of the manual chutes that are really applicable for a lot of our smaller farms between 2 and even 600 cows. Karl, you could get away with utilizing just a manual chute without going to the electrics and then to the hydraulics. But the electrics and hydraulics just make it easier. It's just quicker throughput and all those sort of things. But these are a couple of some fantastic facilities. This one's a brand new one in southern New South Wales. So part of the hoof training.
Then we can't see your screen that you're sharing. We've just got your.
Dean, you need to click down there on the bottom of the screen.
Does that work?
Start slideshow.
Go over with your cursor down on the big slide on the bottom there we go. A little more over. Right there. Click on that. Down.
No.
What happened now?
I don't know. I've got out of it. I'll have to
escape.
Yeah. Yeah, I've gone dead.
There we go.
Now.
Is that up?
There you got it.
Okay, let's just keep it on that slide. Okay, so some of these facilities, this is a brand new one in southern New South Wales. This is actually a dry lot facility with 3,000 cows and on this way to a lot more, but he's got a manual raised chute, an MR chute. Fantastic opportunity to build facilities and something along with this equipment is making sure not only that it's safe and effective to use for the operator and for the cow, but it's undercover. If you're going to put a chute in, put it undercover so that you can access it 24/7. It makes it so much better. This roof is high. We're going to have ventilation in there. So it's going to keep the environment good for the operator as well as the animal. Another training facility that we did up in the Hunter Valley just recently with a bunch of a farmer there and who's got a lot of vets associated, did a lot of training with vets. Some interesting things. So you learn in the course that Karl does, he's really adapted the 5-step method and made it even easier for us to adopt. There's some new stuff that's happened in Karl's training. One of them is like here, we've put a block on the claw, the sound claw, and then we're actually trimming the lesion out. So if we have the opportunity to actually do that, we tend to give the glue more time to set. Sometimes if it's an actual wall cracker likes, we can't actually do that. We've got to deal with the lesion. But anytime we can actually put the block on earlier, gives us greater adhesion and opportunity time for that glue to set. Hey, Karl? Yep,
exactly.
Some of the tools, again, so this is a veterinarian from the Hunter Valley in the training session. They had the equipment on the deck for sharpening the knives. Having the right equipment to keep your if you're dealing with that lesion like it was in that last photo, if you do not have a surgical knife, you're going to cause damage to the animal because you'll go harder. You need to have these things surgical. Karl's got all this equipment. We have it online on the Shopify side of the Eagle Drop Direct. It's literally now just a case of getting on board, ordering your equipment. It comes out in mail, or if you're lucky enough and we time it well enough, you can get it out of the back of my truck. But again, another opportunity. This is just a manual chute. That's not the raised one, but on a step. So, adapting some of these facilities to make sure that it's easy for you to actually utilize this equipment. We've got another photo down here. So here's a brand new facility gone in. Very interesting. I've never seen one like this around the world. You've actually got a drawbridge. So behind the trimmer there, it's literally a drawbridge that lets the animal walk across. So it's just the manual chute without the raise, but they've got a very large part. Unfortunately for this particular one, because the guy is a shorter guy, we're probably going to have to put steps on this concrete block so he can stand a bit higher and actually deal with the lesions a bit easier. But for me, it was okay. But yeah, if you're a little bit short, but this is the sort of equipment that we can do, and we can set up facilities well. But this is really well thought out by the farm.
And Dean, another thing we can also help everybody with is setting up the chute with a proper race so that cows actually load in well, like either with a butt box design or just the right type. What's happening a little bit before the chute. So one person can do it, because if it's like Dean from the beginning says, if it's not easy, it's not going to get done. We're going to put it off. So if we make it, the easier we make it, and I can see that anywhere, even my farms, if it's easy to do, they take care of a lame cow. They put a cow in there quick, put a block on, and do something about it. And it's done much quicker than if we have to set something up, or if it's raining when we're doing that, all of those type of things make a huge difference.
Even in the heat, Karl, I mean, we have 45-degree heat. The last thing we want to do is get out there and be trimming cows in 45-degree heat without a roof over. It's something cheap and easy we can do. It doesn't take much thinking to do that. But what you raised about the bud box, I think if you haven't heard about a bud box and what Professor Temple Grandin developed in her animal welfare and movement of cattle, look up bud box systems. We can help you design. Karl's been building these facilities around the world. We've got some, in fact, that last photo with where we go, not even there. So in this facility, there's a bud box behind this to the right, and it allows one operator to actually deal with it, as opposed to having to have two people to help you operate and load that chute. So this is the Karl Burgi Comfort Hoof Care tour coming up, starting the 4th of July and the 15th of July. But watch this space. There's the information out there now. If you're looking for a course, come on board. We'd love to have you. This is our website. If you haven't seen it before, it's actually got a lot of information. This video will go up on the blog site on the website as well as all our previous webinars, which has been some fantastic ones, whether it's been ventilation or whether it's been effluent or animal welfare and health in regards to trimming. Some fantastic opportunities. And I'd like to just finish my part. Just some things that just come to mind in the last couple of weeks. There's some things happening in the industry that I wasn't aware of in terms of what's happening with our tires. Our older tires, we were shipping them off to China one stage. The government has stopped that last year. Now they're going to landfill. So there's been the company, and there's a bit of information kicking around now that they're actually making these very interesting tire mats. So basically they cut off the walls, they use the walls for silage pits, and then they use these, bolt them together, cross pattern, and put these into areas, and you can see like around a hay ring, but these can go onto tracks. A fantastic resource and use, getting away from rocks and mud. I think this is something that, going forward, it might be a really handy option for us. And the other part to it is, without cutting the tire totally and making it into the tread, actually using it for mechanical concrete. A lot of good information online about mechanical concrete, but it stabilizes the roads very, very effectively and very, very cheaply. But a couple of really good tools that we can adopt going forward. And that's me.
Thanks, Dean. And thank you. Thanks, Karl, for joining us on the webinar of your evening. We really do appreciate it. I think there's a lot of really practical information. And look, you're talking about, are you ready for the future? You read that, farming for our future in the background. Oh, we didn't set that up at all, did we, Karl? But look at that.
No, look at that.
So we really look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Please, the people that have joined in, we really appreciate your time, but come and see these guys. Dean and Karl have got the show on the road. Victoria on the 4th and 5th of next month. So you join in. We've got a link that's going out on our socials and also will be sent to you. And then we've got, I'd say Victoria, Sydney on the 4th and 5th. So we start in Sydney on the 4th and 5th. Then Victoria on the 11th and 12th. I'll be down in the Gippsland. And then also we'll be up in Queensland on the 14th and 15th as well. So come and see these guys in person, ask your questions. It's a wealth of knowledge there. And if you've got a problem in regards to Hoof health, these guys are the ones to fix it. So thanks very much for your time, Karl and Dean. And we look forward to it.
Thank you, Mike, for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to coming back down under again. It's been like almost 4 years. So
yeah,
too long, Karl. Been too
long.
Terrific. Well, thanks everyone, and thank you all, and we'll talk to you all soon.
thanks everyone.
Bye now.